Hello and welcome into the KE Report. Shad and Corey here, getting an update from Eric Wetterling, also known as the Hedgeless Horseman. And we'll put a link to the Hedgeless Horseman website down below this so you can follow along with Eric's work. And Eric, you've been a busy guy lately, traveling around. You were just up at the Nordic Funds and Mines Conference in Stockholm, Sweden. And this was a conference, kind of a smaller boutique conference. I think they had a couple dozen companies there, fund managers, different capital markets people. Just like always, we like to take the temperature and see what the vibe was like in Stockholm. Any key takeaways? What did you get out of the conference?
Yeah, first of all, it was relatively hard to mingle because I had meetings back to back through both days, basically. So I didn't see a single presentation or keynote speaker, and I didn't have much time to mingle either. But I thought it was great. I mean, I got a lot of work in, and it was like 15 minutes from where I live, so it didn't take much time. I think the sentiment was kind of similar probably to Beaver Creek. I mean, a lot of people having a hard time believing that the juniors are trading where they are when gold is so high and actually silver is doing well. But the CEOs, I mean, they felt pretty energetic. They like Stockholm, which I'm happy to hear as a Swede. And I really liked it. Again, it's like the most convenient conference I've ever been to. So it might be different if I was jet lagged and all of that. But I also heard a lot of Swedish people. I think there was quite some maybe funds and banks and high net worth individuals, all of that. But again, I didn't really get too much time to mingle. So I'm not 100% sure what people were there. But I think it was a success. I mean, I talked to some companies. They didn't really have much complaints, except for maybe some didn't like the coffee. But that's okay if that's the biggest problem.
Hey, Eric, what did you hear in some of your meetings about how companies were financially in terms of having money in the bank or needing to raise money to go through any work programs, to drive forward any catalyst for this year and into next year?
They seem to be doing quite well. I mean, I heard some stories where it's like they met one or two investors and they basically, hey, we'll fork up $1 million or something. And maybe that's enough for, depending on the size of the company, of course. And then I met with some or quite a few, I was going to say, there are self-funded or close to self-funded. And then there's like, foreign mining, for example, which is probably the best junior in terms of access to capital there is. So they don't have a problem with that. So no, I think overall, my impression from what I can remember of the companies I talked to, it wasn't like too many that had obvious access to capital problems. I think it was more just to get retail investors and some backing from maybe high net worth individuals, yada, yada. And of course, some of the Swedish banks, etc., they can't really invest in the juniors. And then the Jordan Fund was there, for example, which is big in Sweden and has quite some following. But I felt like it was more, not too many people screaming about money per se, that they're down to their last cents. I think it was more like to get their names out there.
Yeah, Eric, and I think it's really still the tale of the haves and the have-nots, and the companies that are attending conferences at this point that have the money to market are the ones that are funded or have access to capital. It's all the companies that can't show up to these conferences, that don't even know how they're going to fund their next work program, that probably are not out marketing. But you've also been busy in Sweden traveling this month, going on a site visit out to First Nordic Metals. First Nordic traded on the TSXV under the ticker FNM, and I believe you were visiting their Barcelle project. So let's get some boots on the ground feedback here from your site visit to First Nordic's project.
Yeah, no, that was awesome. I mean, it only took 1 hour with an airplane to get to the Lycksele airport, which is not too far off from the Barcelle project. So, I mean, one could probably almost commute from Sweden. So I was kind of surprised. I knew there was an airport up there, but I wasn't sure how active it was. Apparently, there's at least one trip to that place and back every day, pretty much. So again, a good surprise. Very fun to meet Agnico team. Very fun to meet Kåre Höglund, which is, I think, is head of European exploration for Agnico Eagle. I've seen some interviews with them and read some articles, etc. I never met him in person. But absolutely fantastic team. Very impressed what they are doing. Well, he speaks Swedish, and I think almost everyone there actually spoke Swedish, which was, I mean, fun for me. And we went out to the exploration pit and saw their office up there, and I was just very much impressed with their community relations. I mean, they basically been there since 2015. And I mean, Agnico, as you know, I mean, they're pretty much the best in the business, and they don't half-ass anything. They don't cut corners or anything like that. I mean, we had basically locals waving to us when we passed them with our cars. So they weren't throwing stones, actually waving instead. And yeah, I mean, it was great. And I got to take a few rock chip samples. I love to do that, especially if I think a project is has a pretty good shot of actually becoming a mine. So, you know, someday that's probably going to be owned by a larger company, the whole project. And then you won't get to have access. So I can say that, hey, you know, I had a sample from the outcrop, let's say. Yeah, no, it was just really, really fun, especially again, as a Swede, and just to see how Agnico works and how good they are. I mean, they have done a ton of studies and all that. So the groundwork they're doing with, you know, whatever water tests and stuff like that. I mean, I bet most juniors don't even come close to what they are doing. And that's not something that shows up in a presentation either. It's like, you know, all that has been going on in the background since 2015, which most juniors should do if they want to actually get a project into production. But hey, they have been the operators since that time. So again, there's a huge amount of work that takes time, and it's not easily done and costs money, and that's already put in place. And I don't think, for example, that's appreciated in the case of Borssele.
Yeah, you know what does move stocks though, Eric? Drill results, as we know, and the company has some drilling that's starting up at 3 different projects, 4 different targets, I believe, that are getting drilled starting next month, starting in October, and some of that drilling running the whole way into early next year. You excited about any of these programs? Which ones have your focus in terms of near-term catalysts that could be appreciated by the market?
Well, for starters, I mean, I see First Nordic as a free option on a lot of exploration success. I mean, as I probably said a bunch of times before, I think the Borssele project is a tier 2 project, could become maybe tier 1 one day. And I think I'm stealing that already in First Nordic. So all the exploration potential just comes risk-free. In a sense, it's very cheap to work in. It's very cheap to work in Sweden. And I mean, we have the huge anomalies at Påbacken and Storjuktan, and they're even going to drill the Klippen project also in the future. So it's hard to say. I mean, anything basically that they find could be a value add, because there's already critical mass at Borssele, and we probably talked about before. I mean, the threshold for development in that part of Sweden is probably one of the lowest in the world, given that there's a 20,000 ounce gold mine that's just gone into production that will be actually shipping ore to the Svartliden plant, which is right next to the Påbacken Ida discovery. And again, when you already have the kind of production base at Borssele, of course, Agnico, why they took a 13% corporate stake in First Nordic. I mean, they probably want to see, you know, let's say they find 2 1 million ounce deposits or something. I mean, the footprint of these anomalies is like bigger than Borssele, so there's sure multi-million ounce potential that again is for free. But I'm just excited if they hit anything. I mean, if they found 1 million ounces, you can get maybe 100,000 ounces per year, 10-year mine life, you know, and have a central hub at Borssele, for example. So I don't have any one specific. I mean, maybe the Storjuktan anomaly is a bit bigger, but maybe not. But still, there's a lot of samples coming out. So it's like they're going to find more targets. These are just the ones we know about right now. So I would say First Nordic probably has one of the biggest exploration upsides of any gold junior I know of. And that's for free. So, I mean, a big reason why I love the story.
Yep. Well, it's definitely a lot of land to cover 100 kilometers of strike, and then even beyond Storjuktan and Paulback, and they have a lot of other targets they haven't even begun testing yet. So we'll try to get Taj and Adam back on the show soon for an update and see what the plans are with this exploration program. But another company that you said you met with at this Nordic Funds and Mines conference was Sierra Madre. We've talked about them on the show recently. This is a company that has taken over the La Guitarra mine complex in Mexico from First Majestic. They're putting it back into production, traded on the TSXV under the ticker SM. And they're kind of still in that trial mining phase where they're ramping up towards commercial production. What were your key takeaways in meeting with management at the conference?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I spoke with Alex Langer maybe a few years ago, actually. I think he was doing something with Prime Mining at the time, if I remember correctly, but never met him in person. But I had looked into the company actually after we talked. And no, it's one of those that fit kind of the sweet spot, I was going to say right now. And we discussed this before, where it's like, okay, if sentiment sucks and it's, let's say you have a hard time to raise capital, and if you do, let's say you get diluted. But if you have a company which is already in production, well, that's another story because they don't necessarily need to raise money. And so it's like that got me interested already. Okay, it's not a big mine right now, but okay, they're in production, probably making bank at these silver prices. But it was when he went through like the exploration potential of the district that this might be a low sulfidation district. So when you added the district scale exploration potential with like veteran mine operators, because a lot of them actually that are working there now has worked at that mine before, and you have a bunch of ex-Prime Mining guys in there. So it's like, okay, I kind of see that they have a lot of things covered. If I remember, there's a pretty good, skin in the game as well. So hey, if you can, depending on how you look at it, it's a production story in a sense. So it's got beta to silver, obviously, and gold because it's a gold silver rich system. But you also have that exploration potential, which you're not necessarily paying for. And if that's really successful, I mean, they can just self-fund their way to maybe, I don't know, 100+ million ounces of AG equivalent, etc. So I like the 1-2 combo basically, because otherwise if you just have a small mine and not too much exploration potential, it's like how excited can you even be of a small mine? But if that quote small mine, which is expected to be ramping up as well, can prove up a big deposit, which could warrant a much bigger operation. I mean, yes, imagine if we're in a real silver bull by the time they do that.
Well, Eric, this is, I think, the real come to market moment for the company because they are ramping up. They say that they'll be at 500 tons per day before year end, and that is when they think commercial production can be declared. They're currently at 350 tons per day through it looked like all of September. Now, it's hard to say if the company is just minting money right now because we don't have those financials, and we know how tough and capital intensive it can be to ramp up these mines. But when does the market take notice here in your eyes, Eric? Is it when the company says we're in commercial production? Is it after they release some of their financials 1 or 2 quarters in? Look, we've all seen mine ramp ups not work and ones work. So when do you think the market cares about this mine ramp up?
That's a good question, which I don't have a real answer to. I mean, this sector is so weird in a sense that a lot of the time I have a hard time trying to guess what an ignorant retail sector is going to care about. I mean, some stuff that's just significant coming out of some junior, nobody cares about that. But once a junior that doesn't even have, let's say, much going on, as soon as it starts an uptrend for whatever reason, then people get excited, even though not much have happened really. So it's like guessing when sentiment is going to kick in, what's going to trigger that. I don't know. I don't know exactly how the market views this. Is it valued as investors looking for production that are in it, or is like how much of the investors are focusing on the exploration potential and waiting for that to trigger? So like without knowing that, I couldn't tell you really. I just think again that if they just do what they set out to do, and I have pretty good confidence that they will be able to do that because they have operated it before and seem to be a good team. Sprinkle in some exploration potential, and then let's say you have an uptrend, maybe starting from silver or the company's news. I mean, then all of a sudden the narrative is going to shift, and maybe I don't know what's going to rule the day, if it's, the production growth, or if it's this could be 100 million ounces AG equivalent narrative. So yeah, I just can't say what. I just think that there's a lot of upside risks here, I think.
Yeah, Eric, it's going to be interesting, and we'll try to get the company on for an update soon. I did meet with them in Beaver Creek myself, and in full disclosure, I am invested in the company now. But one of the takeaways I had was that they want to use this first mine as kind of a hub and spoke methodology, because they believe some of the bigger deposits are still laying around where First Majestic did a lot of exploration, and they believe that they could create that hub and spoke method where they have other spokes feeding this mill, and then they eventually ramp it up in size and increase the throughput. So it's going to be an interesting journey to watch, but it's obviously going to take some time, and they got to get the first one going. So we'll keep tabs on that. But one other company that you said you met with at the conference, which has been on a lot of people's thoughts lately, and that's Amex Exploration. It's traded on the TSXV under the ticker AMX. They released their mineral resource estimate on the Perron project in early September and really got whacked for it. I mean, I think the market had expectations that were maybe beyond what the company was trying to state. And so as a result, they got into the penalty box. In meeting with them in Beaver Creek, again, I came away impressed that they still have a lot of upside, both on the exploration side and development side. But you just met with them. What was the takeaway you had from Amex Exploration?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think the more I looked into it, the more I talked to them, the more interesting it looked. Because we discussed this shortly after the MRE and the following crash. But because I know, and you guys know, I mean, this sector, when it's really volatile, when you have a big cataclysmic, I was going to say, event, it typically overshoots either to the upside or the downside. And I mean, you kind of had a sense it was a high quality project because you have El Dorado in there, and they've been producing a lot of impressive news releases. So when that took a hit like that, okay, I mean, I like to buy cheap. I mean, I buy falling knives most of the time, and in this sector, that's a lot of the time. So I guess I have something against buying something that's popular. And yeah, my default setting is to buy stuff that's cheap. So if that goes down, 50, 60% on an MRE, and it kind of, my impression is that, I mean, I don't think they're very far from, I mean, it might be even mine build worthy right now. And I think they have a PA coming out sooner or later. And of course, this is only a snapshot, which a lot of the time people forget, I think. You have a snapshot of, okay, this is how many ounces they know they at least have. And that system is wide open. There's a lot of, exploration targets they went through. So it's like, this is just a base case kind of. And if the PA is nice, then it's maybe shows that, hey, this is already a standalone project worth building. And the infrastructure seems really good. So, and I think they're going to be able to permit it. Seems to be a very good location. So I would expect this to become a mine one day. And since they haven't closed off the system, and there's many more targets. So I can see this becoming one of those where it's like, okay, you kind of confirm their production base right now. And again, I don't think it's going to be that hard to permit. I don't expect huge capex either. So I do think it's going to be a mine one day. And who knows, down the line, maybe there's 3-4 million ounces, for example. So I think this looks like a pretty, good entry if you like gold in Canada. That's like relatively low risk. I mean, it's a post-discovery story, obviously, since they have a PA coming out soon. And again, you have that third-party validation. I don't think the MRE was that big of a surprise to El Dorado. I mean, I bet they have modeled this stuff already. So, but it scared the shit out of the retail sector, or that simply people were sticking out, hoping to, get rich quick when the MRE came out. So if they already, like always, plan to be selling, obviously they plan to be selling after the stock went up on an MRE. Instead, it went down. So, I mean, if that was their holding period to the MRE, they're going to sell no matter what. And that probably got other people selling. And then you have a pretty good recipe for undervaluation.
Well, that PEA is coming later this year, they say, and this overall resource that came out is about 1.6 million ounces, with 1 million of those ounces being in the inferred category. It is of a generally higher grade. The measured and indicated was over 4 grams per ton. The inferred was a little under 4 grams per ton. But Eric, they're saying that within this resource and all the drilling to the end of next year is going to be 600,000 meters. How big does this resource have to be, or is this resource a bit fractured here? Because that's a lot of drilling. I assume the market would expect a much larger resource maybe coming at the end of next year. Any insights on how big you think that resource needed to be to satisfy the market?
No, I couldn't tell you. Again, because there's so many, let's say, different speculators in the stock. So we just saw that this was obviously not enough. It seems from what I heard, people were expecting up to 3 million ounces, for example. And given how much drilling they have, maybe it's kind of, even though I didn't follow the story that well, I mean, but you still saw them, put up drill results and drill results. But let's not forget either that the high grade zone that they've been following, I mean, it's becoming quite deep. So, I mean, if you have to drill, a 1 kilometer hole, you still just have one intercept, whereas like if it was 100-meter holes, that would be 10 drill holes and all of that. So, I mean, I think they have a lot. I mean, it kind of makes sense because they have a high grade core, for example, in the resource, which is like, 13, 14 grams per ton or something. It starts quite near surface, which would help with the payback, and hopefully that will make the PA look good. But I would think that, I mean, they could also maybe do more, near surface exploration, not maybe necessarily following that high grade zone down to, 2 kilometers, for example. But yeah, again, it's like always, it's hard to say. I want wide berth, let's say. I don't think you should really need precision I mean, if it's a no-brainer, for example, you shouldn't really need precision. My only thing really is that, okay, these seem to be smart people. Eldorado probably had a good idea what they think the resource could be, let's say. So I simply think that it's probably too cheap. And if they hit another high-grade discovery, a new lens, and it starts at, let's say, near surface, for example, I mean, then they have 2 high-grade zones, and all of a sudden it could be a very good mine, and still there's plenty of areas they haven't even tested yet. So I think this might be really intensive, which is, if you have good access to capital, that might not be a problem. But yeah, so as always, I don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but for sure they're going to find more ounces the more they drill. I just think this is a pretty good risk-reward starting case, since you're basically buying this company at sunk cost. So, I mean, to redo it would cost as much as the market cap, basically, and it would take maybe 6 years. So you're cutting in line and buying it after the fact with a price reset and probably sentiment reset as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. They've already spent all the money to get it to this point, and it would take probably more money than that to even get back to than their market cap right now just to get the drilling done. And when I talked with their team in Beaver Creek, I also met with Jonathan Gagne. He's new to the team, but he just recently helped construct Meadowbank mine, and then most recently the Greenstone mine from Equinox. And he said, hey, this thing is going to be a mine. And some of it was how they modeled it. They weren't allowed to include certain portions of it as the mineral resource yet, based on the way they blocked it out. But he believes that a lot of those are going to come into the update in the resource. So we'll see, and we'll try to get the company on. But definitely some interesting travels you've been on, Eric. Thank you for the feedback on the Nordic Funds and Mines show. Appreciate getting your feedback on the site visit to First Nordic Metals, to their Barcelona project, meeting with the Agnico team, and then your thoughts on Sierra Madre and Amex Exploration. And if people want to keep up to date with Eric's thoughts on companies, definitely click on the link below. It takes you over to the Hedgeless Horseman website, so you too can follow along with the companies Eric's following or his insights on the market. And as always, looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, guys. The same. And as always, consider me biased. I own shares of most companies I talked about.